Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the opening session will now begin. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the opening session will now begin. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the opening session will now begin. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the Policy Center for the New South welcomes you to the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues. Translation headsets are available on your seats. Channel 1 is for English, Channel 2 is for French, Channel 3 is for Arabic, and Channel 4 is for Spanish. The session will now begin.
Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 400 high-level participants will gather from more than 80 countries to delve into this year's theme, a more assertive Atlantic, its meaning for the world. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the moderator for the launch of the 10th edition of the Atlantic Currents, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, Mohammed Loulichki.
The Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's my privilege to present to you the 2023 edition of the Atlantic Current. It's a special presentation because first it is the 10th anniversary of this report, and I think that during these 10 years we accumulated a wealth of knowledge, of analysis, of reflections about the wider Atlantic. And these wealth of knowledge is being made at the disposal of decision makers, thinkers, academia, researchers. These 10 years, during these 10 years, the Policy Center of the New South have tried to develop the concept of a wider Atlantic in order to raise consciousness about not limiting the transatlantic community only to Europe and to North America, and particularly to the relations in the framework of NATO. Thinking about wider Atlantic is trying to involve and trying to make connections between North and South, between the two shores of the Atlantic, despite the distances. What brings momentum to this concept of wider Atlantic is the recent initiative that has been undertaken from both shores. In November 2023, His Majesty, in his speech on the occasion of the 48th anniversary of Green March, announced a very important initiative which aim is to create an integrated community through the Atlantic, beginning by the African countries bordering the Atlantic. And 2 sessions have been organized in 2022 and 2023 in order to operationalize this concept and this initiative. At the other shore of the Atlantic, there was, all of you know, the Declaration of Washington of 2023, November, and the conference, the summit conference that was held by President Biden with the participation of 35 countries, including 15 or 16 countries. These initiatives has to be our consolidation of other initiatives that has been undertaken by Africa and by Latin America. So the question that is posed is, are these different initiatives amount to promoting the likelihood of this wider Atlantic? To understand and maybe to try to bring inputs to this idea, I would like to invite successively 4 experts. I will begin by the Vice President of GMF, Mr. Ian Lasser. If he would like to join me, you're most welcome. The second panelist will be Ms. Jessica Lillian de Alba, professor from the Universidad Nuevo León de Mexico. Then Admiral Nuno Antonio Denano Bragança, Atlantic Center Coordinator, and former aide-de-camp of President Sampaio of Portugal. And finally, we give priority to the community outside of PC Center, and we only announce, as a matter of humility and modesty, those who participate to the PCNS. Ms. Afaf Zarkir. Okay, the 2 gentlemen and the 2 elegant ladies have participated to this edition of 2023. It's not a matter of discrimination because we have at least 30 contributors to this edition. It's only that we are trying to rotate between the contributors. And those who have in the podium, instead of asking them to tell us about their their contribution to this report, I put myself in the shoes of the audience. And I decided that instead of them presenting their contribution, I wanted to ask them very simple questions. 3 simple questions. The first one, does the wider Atlantic has an identity? Are we building an identity of the Atlantic, of the wider Atlantic? So that's my first question. Secondly, can the initiative that have been undertaken and to which I referred earlier, can they contribute to promoting this idea of a wider Atlantic? And finally, third question and the last question would be, what are the topics, what are the domains, what are the sectors that are more likely to contribute to promoting this wider Atlantic? I hope that I did not deceive most of you who wanted to ask some other questions. But to me, these three questions seem to be extremely basic. And I would like to begin with one of those who really have a very substantive contribution to the notion of wider Atlantic. Mr. Ian Lesser, Vice President of JMF and the representative of this institution in Brussels. Please, go ahead.
Ambassador Loulichki, Mohammed, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here again, and thank you for those kind words. You know, this event and this discussion and this topic, in fact, is very dear to us at GMF, in part because of all the work we've done together over the years on this, and to see this, and to see so many people here interested in this theme is terrific. You know, just to say a word about your questions. In fact, it turns out to be the things I was also writing about, which is great. You know, on identity, I really do think this matters. You know, I come from an institution that thinks about transatlantic relations, but to be honest, we think about it, have thought about it in a very traditional way, you know, between Washington and Brussels or Berlin or whatever it is, this kind of north-north axis. You know, at one time perhaps that was sufficient, but you know, the thought is that we really need to change our kind of mental maps about this and to think more broadly. And what can drive that? Well, I think Atlantic identity is part of the story. And I think it's also worth considering that if we go back some centuries, actually, the center of gravity in the Atlantic wasn't always so northward. It used to be more balanced between north and south, sometimes not for very good reasons, as we know. But I think in a way, we're coming back to something that is more balanced in the Atlantic. And I think it's also become part of this growing and sometimes not so easy debate about North-South relations globally, about the so-called global South, if you like that terminology or not, but you know, so I think it's impossible now to have this conversation. We could have a few years ago maybe, but now it's very hard to have it without reference to that bigger global debate about North-South relations, and I think an Atlantic identity actually matters. These initiatives, I think, are really very important. The initiatives from Morocco, from the United States, from Portugal, but they're pan-Atlantic, and it gives some concrete form to what is otherwise a very interesting but very intellectual debate. And maybe that gets to, you know, your third question, which is really about what the agenda could be. And you know, there are a number of different possibilities. Obviously, there are very heavy geopolitical and security issues that are out there that we all know about. But is this where you should start in the Atlantic? Maybe, maybe not. And I think it's encouraging that the initiatives you mentioned, in fact, don't start with that. They start with other things. I mean, my short list would include climate and energy, and I know we're going to hear more about that. I mean, this is an absolutely animating issue in the Atlantic because the effects of climate change are clearly more pronounced, most pronounced in the high north and in the south. Connectivity at all levels, infrastructure, in the maritime space, between cities, but also intellectual connectivity, other kinds of connectivity, digital connectivity, undersea cabling, all of these things that are happening every day that are actually making the Atlantic space something coherent. And then finally, you know, I think the answer is your original question, is this identity idea. And, you know, the more that we talk about this and discuss it, perhaps it gains some momentum. So thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we will stay in the Americas. Let's see what is the perception of Mexico regarding this idea and what is the likelihood of having this space emerging and this cooperation taking place between the two shores of the Atlantic. Please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to these Atlantic currents. I think it is very important to keep on having these discussions and for having me here in the Atlantic dialogues. I think to build an Atlantic identity, it's hard because there are so many countries involved and so many differences between them. But talking just about this Atlantic side of Africa, which is wide, and North America. I think that we can always say that there is a lot to do and that we could do much more, and we could, in fact, because relations are very limited at this point. For instance, North America is a big region. It has 23 trillion, an economy of $23 trillion. It has the 27th GDP of the world. So with that vast productivity, I think we should look into Africa, which is growing. They have 60% of the cultivable land. They have youth population. They have digital advances. They have natural resources. So what is that we can do? Free trade. And this is how we can build this identity together through real things and practical things like free trade. Right this second, we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that is in the way, and until Africa itself has not really come to a maturity on it, we may expect a delay of mixing North America in that equation. Also, I would like to mention the AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act. That's also trying to get closer to certain African states, as Canada has made some efforts. And I have to say that Mexico has had a limited and reactive response. There could be many opportunities, especially in the Sahel. So what can I see for the future is this free trade agreement growing between the two regions, not only by country, because this is normally what happens. We tend to go bilateral instead of going full steam ahead. We have renewable energy that can provide energy to 600 million Africans. We have tech investments. We have healthcare possibilities and opportunities, manufacturing. In all of that, I think we could find an advantage. Of course, there are challenges, like regulatory challenges, cultural nuances that I've already mentioned. But being realistic, I think this is where we should go and try to build this identity through something that is going to be real to the population and not just to this.
Okay. Thank you for bringing us from wishful thinking to realities on the ground. Let me maybe go beyond, a little bit beyond this thematic and maybe ask you about what is the perception of Mexico as a country? I mean, you are an emerging power anyway in Latin America. What is your perception of the relations with Africa in general and the Atlantic African countries in particular? Is there any kind of strategy that is building? Is there any keen interest to develop something, or you still looking to the north, to the?
Well, first of all, I need to say I am an academic, right? I am not a diplomat. But that is important to, underline. I don't think that Mexico has a strategy overall, okay. And I do think that they need to be more active, and that there are lost opportunities there, okay. And that we need to look into.
Thank you for the frank. But I think also that the Africans have also to develop a strategy towards Latin America in general, and not only look to the United States and sometimes to Canada. Let's not move too far from Morocco, go only to Portugal and see what is your take in terms of wider Atlantic identity and the other questions that I asked earlier, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity of the Atlantic Center to be one of the contributors, of the co-authors of this very interesting edition of the Atlantic Dialogues. And moving fast, because I know the time is not in our side, and let me talk not really about Portugal, but about the Atlantic Center, because the Atlantic Center have these principles of all of Atlantic, touching already 3 continents and 23 countries, and of course looking a more focused area that is this community of interests of the Atlantic regarding security, but security in broad terms. Broad terms, we are speaking about security, safety, human security, and when we talk about human security, we talk about food security and health security. But why is important? We already highlight the importance of the Atlantic regarding the socio-economic sustainable development for all the coastal states of the Atlantic Basin. But we also know that, for instance, in this complex and dynamic space, we have a framework of security challenge, security risks, security threats that are really not isolated phenomena. They are interdependent, they are transnational, and because of that, we are assisting regarding sadly, the conflict deterioration that we already saw during 2022, back of a pandemic crisis. The challenge that are put on the table regarding democracy, we are assisting a movement of a large number of initiatives that is really trying to push at a national, regional, and international level, the dialogue, the increase of dialogue, the increase of an effective cooperation in order to address the challenge that arise in this vast space. So we have, for instance, Leslie already talked about the African Atlantic States Process, an initiative of Kingdom of Morocco. We have the initiative of the United States of America, the Joint Declaration for Atlantic Cooperation, that joined other forums that are already there, like the Yaoundé architecture that was put together a lot of countries that for several times have some difficulties to bring together and joint initiatives regarding maritime security. We have the G7++, Friends of Gulf of Guinea. We have Atlantic Center, of course, but we have also the ZOPACAs, the South Atlantic Peace Zone, and that is South Peace Zone. So it's for me very interesting to see how is growing the number of initiatives, how the proposed and how will be sustainable on the time this. We know we have a lot of challenge in front of us, but I think we are convinced that we need to do it. We have also something that is the climate change, and we already talked here about that, the coastalization of countries, the number of megacities that are developing along of the coastline of the coastal states of the Atlantic Basin. And we have, at the same time, the rise, the increase of temperatures of the ocean, the rise of the seas, and how we can impact, for instance, in these coastal states, creating pressure about the coastal states, but also about the marine ecosystems, and at the end, creating or potentiate social conflicts arriving regarding that. So I think the initiatives are there, they arrive, and I think they will, for sure, link this wide Atlantic, because we don't have only problems at south that are not interconnected with problems on north or vice versa. So I think this transnationality and this interdependence will be, for sure, the glue for this wide Atlantic perspective.
Thank you. Well, you talk about environment, about the impact of climate change that is more felt, I think, in Africa than in any other continent. Ms. Afaf Zakit, who is a senior fellow in the policy center and more specialized in environment and energy. She wrote an article about the power purchase agreement, PPA. I would like you to shed a light about this concept, how it could reduce the gap between the North and the South, how it could benefit African countries, particularly Atlantic African countries.
Thank you, Ambassador Loulichki. So basically what we try to do, me and my co-author, is to bring about this authenticity of Atlantic countries in such a technical topic, which is power purchase agreements. So basically, the energy needs of the Atlantic, they vary widely across countries. We have, for example, in the United States and Europe, corporation building utility scale capacities just to answer to their own needs, for example, the Googles and the Amazons, just to answer to their data center needs. Then we have other countries where they're trying to deploy additional capacities in order to grow economically. But then we have in sub-Saharan Africa, more than 600 million people still lacking access to basic electricity. To make matters simple, in order to reduce the fiscal burden on public budgets, what governments do is that they align or that they partner with the private sector in order to build and operate power plants. However, because these schemes that are called IPPs or independent power producer schemes, they involve very large sunk investments, often in bilateral monopolies, meaning that there is private sector participants with public sector participants. So the stakes are very high, and this often creates a nexus of conflict and requires effective and very innovative hedging mechanisms. So these hedging mechanisms can cover everything from foreign exchange risk to change in law or taxation, for example, termination risks, and so on. So basically, what these PPAs do is that, first of all, they guarantee a return on equity or a return on investments to the private participants, but more importantly is that they are important in securing the financing required to build these facilities. However, in order to secure financing, the off-taker or the buyer, which is usually the public utility, needs to be creditworthy. But what we have in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, is lack of creditworthiness, either correct or perceived, of the public utilities. So here comes the power of innovation. We have seen in countries in sub-Saharan Africa that the cost of capital becomes quite severe when the off-taker lacks creditworthiness. We have, for instance, electricity prices that often become too high to be affordable to the end users. We have governments that have to step in order to provide subsidies for it to become affordable, which creates wider efficiencies across the system. And then finally, we also have sovereigns who have to guarantee the power purchase obligations of these utilities. Otherwise, the projects would still be considered non-bankable by the financial institutions. So this has actually worked over the past decades, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, the war on Ukraine, etc., we have a debt crisis in sub-Saharan Africa and in developing economies. So this can no longer be the case in the future. So we need to have some kind of innovative solutions to tackle this. And we have this amazing innovation that occurred in sub-Saharan Africa with this body that was created basically as an intermediary between the private sector and the public sector as a PPP partnership. And this body is actually well capitalized. It's called the Africa Green Co. It's a well-capitalized intermediary. And the innovation also lies in the fact that it's a regional organization, meaning that it's de-risking and distributing risk by working with multiple producers and with multiple countries, by capitalizing on an important assets that we have in Africa, which are power pools. So I thought this was a great example of the identity that we can find in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Atlantic region.
Okay, thank you. We still have, I think, about 12 to 15 minutes. And I would like you maybe to address maybe the following questions. We are living in times of deficiency of multilateralism, of global governance, and people are turning to regional, sub-regional, trying to create some other fora in order to promote integration and to promote facing the challenges, including security challenges. The creation, for example, of this format of Conference of African Atlantic is aimed to promote some kind of integration at the regional level. And this initiative by Morocco has to be, I think, combined with the other one, which is to create this link in terms of energy supply between Nigeria and Morocco. So both of them are combining the same logic, meaning to first take benefit from the Atlantic shores with all these economic extended zones that the Atlantic countries, African countries have. Secondly, energy, which is problematic for some of these countries, and the link between Africa and Europe. Don't you think that instead of relying on the uncertainties of projects coming from outside, for example, the initiative by the United States, for example, the first question that comes to mind, is it sustainable? Is it going to change after the 2024 challenges? Is it going to change, for example, if the Ukraine war will continue? These are some questions that come to mind. And maybe the first reality is for African countries to do their homework before relying on others, to other partners. Once the African countries have consolidated their integration, for example, between the African Atlantic countries, then they can present themselves as reliable and very solid partners. And here, instead of African countries lobbying the United States, Canada, and Europe, it will be maybe, one would wish for that, the others that will be coming to Africa to seduce this potential of millions, hundreds of millions of consumers, especially if we manage to operationalize the economic zone for the African countries. So these are extreme. I know it's a very complex, and I try to make this as complex as possible, but take whatever you can, and anyone who can tip in, please take the floor.
I don't know. It's okay. No, of course.
I left the easy question to the
one
last
minute. 1 minute to say regarding sustainability, of course, and it's quite interesting when we go through the theme of security. Security, and again I say in broad terms, and it was one of the glues of many of the initiatives, and I already told this, but. What is important is, in my point of view, is the movement you are seeing, because all the initiatives are in a certain way already interconnected. Or if they are not at this moment interconnected, they will be in the near future for sure. And I talk about the relations between all the actors of the different continents that are moving in this direction, namely creating this community of interest. But look, the United States initiatives also mentioned the Atlantic, for instance, the Atlantic Center. We are now finished this memorandum with the African Atlantic states process. We are dealing also with the initiative of Brazil. And this is something, a movement they understood, and we all understood at the same level that will be sustainable. Independently of elections, of questions, I think this is my...
Thank you for the positive thinking.
Modest, yes,
okay,
please, I need to
try
be positive for sure.
Try to follow his steps in terms of being positive.
Absolutely, no. I think, look, I think just to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned, Mohammed. Look, I think if we look globally now, but even around the Atlantic, we're at a moment where there is sort of this tension between growing economic nationalism. I mean, I see this in my own country for sure. You mentioned 2024. It could take other turns, obviously. That kind of economic nationalism, creates an environment that's not easy to, for countries to work in. And I think if there are regional settings that take the edges off of that, it's probably all to the good. You also mentioned Ukraine. I think, we have the situation at the moment where, very threatening, animating conflicts are emanating from the north. And so to me, it's perfectly understandable that other partners around the Atlantic and globally in the south, in a sense, want to hold this, a bit at arm's length, and to hedge against the consequences, whether it's about food security or energy. The energy piece is interesting. We have a colleague who obviously knows much, much more about this than I do, but I would venture to say that, one of the consequences of the conflict, Russian behavior and what is happening in Ukraine is that there will be a desire to diversify energy sources of all kinds, and much of that will be in the south. We need structures for approaching that. And some of the initiatives that we've been discussing here could easily help with that. So, and just a final point, I think, we're talking about this very much in a kind of formal state-to-state way, but there are many other actors in the Atlantic space. There are companies, there are civil society organizations, many, many other things. There are cities, there are states, regions. And, at a time of growing nationalism, sovereignty consciousness, these are really important actors, and much of that energy, frankly, is to be found in the south, not just in the north.
Okay. Jessica?
Yeah, I would say that we need to build and we need to believe in institutions. That's what's going to be the most enduring feature. You talk about countries doing their own homework before, and I completely agree with that. We cannot expect somebody from the outside to come and save us from whatever it is that we need saving. For instance, the ADOA, it's from the year 2000, so it's not something new. So if we keep on building in our institutions, and then we can build institutions in a multilateral way. I go back to the free trade agreement, but not only that, we need to invest research and development. We need to invest in renewable energies, like our colleague was talking about. This is not hoping that somebody else does what needs to be done, and governments cannot do it by themselves. We do need the public-private partnerships, and that is what I could say. Without education and without that, we are not going to be able to go to the next level.
Ms. Hafaf, you want to add something?
Yes, I think a lot has been said, but maybe if I can add something, it's maybe the alignment of policies. And this is something that we have seen in Brazil. It's quite innovative, where the central bank has introduced a new foreign exchange law in 2021. But at the same time, what this law also allowed for is the investments in foreign currency, in renewable energy. And this actually aligns with the government's plan of adding an important number of capacity in renewables, about 75 gigawatts. How are we going to achieve that? So the alignment of macroeconomic policies with sectoral policies was amazing in achieving that.
Thank you. Well, I only have 3 minutes, and I want to stick to what's the time allocated. But I don't want the audience to leave this room and criticize me for not maybe evoking something very important. We are not living only in terms of position and interest. We share also values. Where is democracy in this wider Atlantic?
Well, look,
I'm not talking.
Je ne
See, because it might be exported from the United States, or
Yeah.
it might be exported from Africa to the United States.
Depending
and
upon
to
what
the
happens
others.
in our elections, we may need to import some in the United States. But we'll see. Hopefully not. You know, I do think this is. Look, there are differences of view about this. I think, and the values part, which you're right to mention,
Yeah.
of course, is about democracy. But it's not just democracy. It's a lot of other things.
Yes.
It's about tolerance. It's about
Yeah.
a lot of other dimensions. And so, you know, I think, saying this as an American, I think we need to be a little bit careful that we don't make it very difficult to pursue all of these practical initiatives by making this too ideological.
Okay.
I mean, that's my view. I think if we start talking simply about democracy and autocracy, it's an important issue, but many people simply aren't having it, if I can put it that way. And I wouldn't want that to stand in the way of other things that we could do, whatever our preferences might be. So.
Okay.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, democracy, it's a very big subject.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it needs to be in this conversation.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right.
Yes, fully agree with you, but there are always a but. I think democracies are facing a great challenge. at this
All
point.
right.
And that is,
Yeah.
I think,
Everywhere.
something we need to look and to face. So it's
Well, thank you very much. If you can join me and congratulate our panelists first. Okay. I think I stick to the time that has been allocated, and now it's up to you to put your questions to the panelists, and we will try in the remaining exactly 30 minutes to wrap up the session. Please.
Marcos Freitas from Brazil, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center. I'm actually writing a paper on transatlantic relations. And one of the things that has been in absence as we look into the whole process after the Cold War is the end of trust on both sides of the Atlantic, in the region, and all that. The Ukraine war somehow has restored a little on this relationship that was going sour. You know, we can quote Macron, we can tell about everything that has been happening in between. Now, my question is this: how can we restore trust on both sides of the Atlantic, between North America and Latin America, between Africa and Europe? How can trust be restored in a way that is effective and it pushes countries to start cooperating more? Because based on what we were seeing before, trust was an essential matter that was lacking. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Minister? Here.
Thank you. Well, I will say that I'm a proud participant in this conference, that it's difficult, but each year is better than the year before, and you think it cannot be, but
And
it
next
is.
year it's going to be much better than this one.
My question goes, I would say, to all of you, but specifically to Afaf. In the end, we know that if there is a correlation that is clear, is the correlation between baseload electricity and prosperity. And I will insist baseload electricity. I think you have highlighted the big challenge for Africa, for sub-Saharan Africa, which is and the opportunities. And you have highlighted the big elephant in the room, that is how you bring a good idea to bankability. I would like you to explain a bit more about this initiative that is an African initiative that you have mentioned, but I think that has a role to play in what is the fil conductor of what you said, which is de-risking, just making the conditions for private capital to invest.
Thank you, Anna Palacio. Thank you. Magid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Magid Abdelaziz from the League of Arab States. It is evident that the geopolitical climate that is prevailing now in the West, in particular, between the West and the East, is pushing both sides to get closer to other groupings. We see a lot of strategic partnerships by the United States, by Russia, by China, by others, and I assume after our conference immediately there is a conference between Russia and the Arab world here in Marrakesh, and before that there was a conference between China and Africa, and President Biden convened the conference with Africa. Everybody is trying to get the smaller groups and the regional organizations to closer to their position and to get to be interactive with them. How can we utilize this will on the side of the superpowers or the big powers in order to advance our Atlantic dialogue? So that is number one. Number two is, how do we reconcile the relation between the two sides of the Atlantic with the principles that are prevailing in other organizations that African countries, for instance, are part of? I served as Under-Secretary General for Africa, and I know regional integration, settling African problems by Africa, domestic resource mobilization, all this, it is an inter-African framework. And if we go out of this inter-African framework and go to the across the Atlantic, we might be committed to other set of rules that will contradict with what is in the African Union. The same applies for the Union of the Mediterranean. Many African countries in the north are parts of the Union of the Mediterranean that had a conference just 2 weeks ago. Right. And there are a lot of rules and a lot of activities. How do we reconcile all of this when we speak strictly about the western part of Africa and the eastern part of the Americas? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, good morning, everyone. Khadija Ihsan, I'm a journalist for the Mediwan TV. So my question would be addressed to the lady from Mexico. I'm sorry, I didn't really get your name. You mentioned FTAs a couple of times, and I'm wondering how to maybe equalize the benefits from FTAs from both sides of the Atlantic, knowing that usually it's unbalanced, and usually it's one part that benefits more than the other. So how can we equalize this between, especially North and South, and between the African Atlantic and the other side of the ocean? Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Gentlemen, and then you finish, you give it to our, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the Policy Center. Congratulations for this amazing initiative, and thank you for the opportunity to be present. My question is related to democracy and goes to the three organizations, three entities on stage, Policy Center, GMF, and the Atlantic Center. And how can these three initiatives be a grant or contribute to the maintenance of democracy in these challenging times that we are facing? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have a question for Afaf. I am curious about, as COP28 concludes, whether you have any thoughts about how organizations in Western countries, like in the US, maybe USAID, XM, the DFC, might be able to concretely support first build renewable energy development in Africa.
Otherwise, we will get confused. With your indulgence, I will give the opportunity to our panelists to respond in order to avoid them being very confused about a multitude of questions. So please, go ahead, and then we come back. I promise you that until 12:15, we will continue to receive questions.
Well,
Yeah, please.
Well, no, thank you for all of that. I mean, maybe just to pick up on a couple of things. You know, first the question about trust. I mean, it's hugely important, but it's never perfect. And maybe we had some decades after the end of the Cold War where it simply wasn't tested in the same way, or if it was tested, the stakes weren't the same for everybody. You know, I'm not so sure the trust is perfect now, actually, but you're quite right that in many ways the Ukraine war has been a kind of mobilizing, catalyzing event, at least as far as NATO, institutions like NATO, but also US-EU are concerned. We can say more about that, but sustaining that is not exactly easy, and you can easily see how leadership changes on both sides of the Atlantic potentially could perturb that. I think the leadership makes a difference. There was a question about GMF, among others, and democracy. You know, our own approach, frankly, has been, you know, we have different views inside GMF about this. You know, my colleagues don't all agree with me. We have different views, which is a bit of our own democracy. But our focus in that space has mainly been through civil society in places like the Western Balkans and around the Black Sea, where we support civil society organizations that are active in that space. That's sort of been our kind of grassroots approach to that. You know, I think one of the things about this is that if you look across the global south, including the Atlantic piece of this global south, if you want to say, it's not monolithic. There are many, many differences of perfection and interest, but one of the things that is very clear is that countries in the global south, not least countries like Morocco and others, are very good at multilateral diplomacy. Very good at multilateral diplomacy. And it's not surprising to me that they should look for vehicles in which to exercise that. And you know, from the point of view of the United States in particular, but it's also true, I think, for Europe, we just have to be, we can't be such perfectionists about alignment. You know, we're not always going to agree. And I don't think we can have as our objective some sort of grand alignment on key issues all the time. It's simply not going to happen. We'll be disappointed. So I think we need to look for opportunities where we can find them, and I think some of these Atlantic initiatives could present those.
Thank you.
I would start by saying that, yeah, I'm not sure that trust is or could be an issue. Of course, when President Trump was president of the US, there was an issue with the European countries mostly, and with North America. He contested the North American Free Trade Agreement, which has been wonderful, and this is to answer about the free trade agreements question. I think that we never, we have to understand that countries have interests. I don't know, that quote has been attributed to plenty of people. But that's something that's not going to change. Nevertheless, we have been progressing towards a more understanding system. We tend to be very pessimistic, but look how things were in the 18th century, 19th century. Going back in time, more than that. 20th century was very bloody, and still is in different ways. Look at what's going around. But talking about trust, I rather talk about the choices that we can make between aligning and having common values with the West, with the US mainly as a superpower, or other countries like China. And I think the choice is very, very clear. And one great example about how free trade agreements are good is Mexico, because our economy was going to devaluation after devaluation and having economic crisis all the time. And it was when we aligned with the United States and Canada with this free trade agreement that we were able to stabilize our finances, our macroeconomics, creating a very vibrant and growing middle class. And I think one of the benefits that was not good explained when this free trade agreement was contested was one of the failures is to explain people that this is a good thing because they can benefit from it. It's not just talk. And it's not only the multinational companies that benefit, it's just real people, day to day. And by creating this bursting middle class, and this is the benefit that I see in a free trade agreement. What you can do with it is not really in the void. It's something that is very real for people. Of course, not everybody can benefit from it. But I think the benefits are way greater and the advantages are there than the people who do not benefit from it. And I think going back to what you were saying, and I close with this, we have to stand in our own feet. If we do not do that, then we cannot advance in any other direction.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I will take the first and the last question together, because trust and democracy, I think it's something really that match together. And the trust, it's a little bit la vérité de la police. We take a lot of time to achieve trust, and the perception of perfection is a perception, for sure. And it takes 3 seconds, 1 second, for all the work that we have done for a large time to disappear. But I think with dialogue, with inclusivity, and also with consensus, and that is, for instance, when we are talking about these initiatives, it's that paper of inclusivity, because we have a lot of the 65 countries of the Atlantic Basin are in a different stage of development, sharing sometimes not exactly the same values, but be at the same table. And the dialogue, for me, is for sure one of the important issues to take in mind.
Afaf, you have something to add?
Yes, I will answer both ladies' questions at the same time.
Okay.
So what I want to raise is that COP27 certainly highlighted the potential for progress when developing and developed economies find common ground, and it was highlighted by the historic agreement on the Loss and Damage Fund. And COP27 was also the stage for the reform of the global financial architecture, and it was certainly raised by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and a lot of developed economies actually backed that. One of the objectives of Mia Mottley's declaration was to reform sovereign debt in developing economies, because a lot of those infrastructure projects, energy projects, require a lot of funding, and it's already exacerbating the public budgets. Another thing is that it's something that we insist a lot on at the energy team, at the policy center, is that, and this is something that we wrote in another paper, is that mobilizing resources for energy infrastructures relies not only on supply of funding, but also addressing the availabilities of these projects or the demand side of those funding, which necessitates planning, designing, but also institutional bridges. And this is exactly what Africa Green Co did. And the way to get into the details of Africa Green Co, as you answered, as you wanted as your question required, is that it is actually, I have it here somewhere. So actually African Green Co is an intermediary off-taker operating under PPP model, which is a private-public partnership. As a regional body, it aggregates the supply side from the power plants, and it purchases it, and then it sells it to multiple off-takers, multiple countries at the same time, by utilizing an asset that we have in Africa. We have actually 5 power pools in Africa, so it's actually able to cover some of the risks that otherwise one country wouldn't be able to do. So it aggregates risks. That's how it goes.
If you allow me to come back to the trust, I'm asking myself if in nowadays world with states pursuing their selfish interest, if there is a place for trust, or rather there is some kind of ad hoc good intentions and ad hoc good faith rather than trust. Because I think trust is extremely deep feeling and a deep sense of behavior. And in cold institutions as cold as states, personally, I have a lot of doubt about trust.
Trust would be nice. Predictability is even better.
Exactly. Let's always remember that the best agreement is not the one that you sign or conclude, but the one between the intentions that you have in the back of your mind. That's the best, and that's what's called an agreement. So let's go back now to, we still have exactly 12 minutes that we would like to exhaust. I will ask you, in order to satisfy the maximum of you, to really be extremely straightforward, ask questions, and avoid comments. It's not easy to... Yes, okay, please, go ahead. First.
Thank you, Chair. The lady from Mexico actually helped me because I was struggling how to frame my question. I've listened and I'm struggling with the frameworks that we try to work to and the results that we continuously get, and I don't get the impression that we are engaged in trying to understand why it is. We've got frameworks we believe in, we've got actions we take in solving problems, and the actions always produce results which are very far from our stated intentions. We've set out as humanity to create a world which is less Darwinian. In other words, the biggest gorilla does not sleep where he likes. That's what we've said. We've said we want to create a world where that is not the case. But when we start tackling specific problems, we keep reverting to the Darwinian world. When you create regional blocks and you're saying you want to get leverage, you are actually subconsciously or maybe consciously saying you believe in the Darwinian world, because without the muscle, you can't get your way through. Why are we not trying to reconcile this? We've traveled a journey where the evidence, whether you go to the UN or whatever, the evidence continues to be in this box. The biggest gorilla sleeps where he likes. Isn't that our biggest challenge? When we build these sub-blocks, we are saying it is almost inherent in our existence to have muscle in order to have a voice. But explicitly we've said, no, that's not the world we want to create. Help me understand.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Kim Hong-jong from South Korea. And today's talk is very intriguing and interesting to me because I am deeply involved in the thinking about the Indo-Pacific strategy. And so my question is that, two questions. The first one is how much did you think or are you thinking about the Indo-Pacific trends when you are developing this strategy about the Atlantic relations? The second one is the giants competition between the United States and China. And unavoidably, the United States is in this strategy and China is out. So there must be some kind of the special and unavoidable and understandable implications, specific implications when you are developing this strategy. So how much did you think about this kind of things? Thank you.
Thank you. Sizaid, the gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I thank also all the speakers. My question will be very brief, and I hope it will be very clear also. There is a fact that the countries of the Atlantic, from both sides of the Atlantic and also North and South, they have already some kind of cooperation in different multilateral organizations, but also on the bilateral basis. And of course, we know that the countries have different social, political, economical systems. And you, Excellency, Mr. Loulichki, you have asked a very crucial question. Do we have an identity for this Atlantic dialogue? We are on the way to construct it. There are some common values. We cannot discuss them. Everyone will agree that there are some human rights principles, moral principles, ethical, and so on. But the problem and the question I want to ask is the following. How can we help balance the dialogue between the northern and the southern countries of the two sides of the Atlantic? We know that the debate is about discussion between developed and developing countries. The challenges are the same: energy, climate, democracy, conflicts resolution, and so on. But how can we balance the dialogue? Because the North is already organized. And here, I completely agree that we need to develop some coherence of the countries of the South so that they can discuss on the same footing. And the African initiative is a good one. And I hope that the northern countries will help strengthen this initiative so that we can have a real and realistic dialogue between the two sides.
Okay.
That's my question. Can we do something for that? Thank you.
All right. The emerging leader.
Hello, and thank you very much for giving the floor and for a brilliant panel. I'm Landry Signé, and I'm with the Policy Center for the New South. My question, given the importance of artificial intelligence, emerging technology, the fourth industrial revolution, and we are speaking about a more assertive Atlantic, they are critical to unlock economic potential, but also they can generate threats, security challenges, among other. What should be the position of the countries around the Atlantic? Should we have a Atlantic AI and emerging technology governance architecture? How to ensure that the opportunity could be leveraged while the challenges are properly addressed? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last question would be, yes, yours.
Thank you. I am the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Panama. Thank you. I now I have the role of the think tank, so I chair the Atlantic Council out of Harvard. So I'm very interested in how we transfer what we talk about here into real policy. And I have a question. So a lot of you said, let's put aside for a second the democracy point because it gets us nowhere. But as a politician, it is really hard to do so because you respond to your people, and not having a value-based form of alignment becomes very difficult when you're trying to bridge the gap. So I wanted to understand how you think that's possible.
Thank you. So I anticipated your objection before. All right, okay. Okay, thank you. Back to the panelists, and after that, I think that I hope we will make it in 3 or 4 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Ladies first. Ladies first.
Fine.
Jessica first.
Okay, there were too many different questions, and I'm not quite sure that I really grasped all of them correctly. So I would just concentrate in the North and South issue. We cannot always hope that the North is going to come and save the South. We cannot expect that. We should not want that either. And I go back again to the issue of taking our countries seriously. So, and this has to do with democracy. Democracy is a thing that needs not to be on the table. That doesn't mean that it's not important. That doesn't mean that you answer to your constituents. What that means is that you're not going to be fighting wars that you don't have to fight because of democracy. I think, to my point of view, that's not mixing democracy in the equation, especially in the equation of free trade agreements, which I'm advocating for, which are something very tangible and very practical that you can do, and that's going to benefit people. So not talking about the ivory tower, but talking about something very substantial. And before we can do and see a bigger benefit, each country, each party has to do its own work. And if we do not do that, we cannot go anywhere, like I said before, I think.
Thank you. Your take.
Yeah. I can saying that in fact the perception, and I want to talk about the perception. Why? Because recently the German Marshall Fund and the flood, there's the Luso American Development Foundation, launched what I call the transatlantic trends for 2023. And of course the transatlantic trends are the perception of the north side of the Atlantic. And the north side of the Atlantic, we'll see that the different perception from the both sides. And this is a reality that we need to live, and to really to get together to understand. And I give an example of that study that for me is really, really interesting, is we are living, we left the pandemic situation 1 year ago or 2 years ago, and we know how chaotic was, how unprepared was the society for that. And when we saw at this moment the trend or the finds of that trend, and that pandemic is not an issue already. And the people don't look for that as an issue. What is it an issue? It's the climate change, is the migratory problems, and is the conflict between countries. And I think this is really interesting to see, to reflect, and to how we work on with this knowledge that we create, and to understand how can create this bridge, but also between North and South. And I think it's the future. We will have to work together, the North and the South, for a lot of issues, and I think that is the way, as I normally say, we need to be collaborative. And a country alone, a region alone, an initiative alone, will not tackle the challenge that we have alone. We tackle the challenge that we have in front of us. That's so to say.
Thank you. Okay. Assertiveness is the motto for this session. And I think that being assertive, at least for African countries, on whom I may claim to speak on behalf, is about being confident in your means. It's about not judging, but trying to persuade. And in being in a position, as it was mentioned, to adopt the approach bottom-up rather than another approach. And I think that African countries have to build their own resilience, their own integration, whether at the sub-regional, the regional, or continental. We are away from, unfortunately, operationalizing the free trade zone. We have a lot of difficulty to overcome, but I think that the political will is there. The good intentions are there. The trust has to be built between the African countries in order to really build this free trade agreement and present exploit all the potentials of this of Africa, so that it will attract more investments and more attention from the world. Before asking you to join me for A round of applause for our colleagues. Please consider that if we miss one question or one aspect of questions, is 100% my responsibility. All of them are innocent. I am the one who has to be held accountable and responsible. But for the time being, I would like you to join me in really for a round of applause for wonderful panels that I have the privilege to conduct this morning. Thank you. And please tell the management that I stick to the time that has been allocated. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking part in this morning's session. We invite you all to join us for a networking lunch at Les Jardins de la Mamounia. Policy Center for the New South colleagues wearing white lanyards will guide you to and from the lunch. The conference will begin at 2:30 p.m. in this ballroom.